that a materialistic society offers its members. What am I referring to? Well, materialism is really a system of belief or behavior which considers material things, and particularly the control and possession of material things, as more important than human values such as connection, love, or spiritual values such as recognizing the unity of everything.
Ever wonder why you're never satisfied no matter what you achieve? Let's dive into the psychology behind it. Feeling unfulfilled even after hitting your goals? Let's explore why that happens. Curious about why success doesn't always bring happiness? Stick around to find out. Why do we always want more? The answer might surprise you. Today we're diving into why we're never truly satisfied, no matter what we achieve. This feeling of perpetual dissatisfaction is partly due to the hedonic treadmill. When we achieve something, we quickly return to a baseline level of happiness and start wanting more. Psychologist Gabor Maté explains that societal pressures and unrealistic expectations set by social media also play a significant role. So how can we break free from this cycle of dissatisfaction? According to Gabor Maté, focusing on meaningful connections and personal growth rather than material success can make a big difference. It's also important to set realistic goals and appreciate the small wins in life. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think contributes to feelings of dissatisfaction in your life? How do you manage to stay content? Let's discuss in the comments below.
There are 500,000 children in this country who are receiving antipsychotic medications. Not because they have psychosis, but because they are upset and their behaviors are problematic. What we have here is the massive experiment in the chemical control of children's brains without knowing what actually the long-term effects will be. I know that in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I live and work, there's a clinic at the Children's Hospital specifically to deal with the side effects of antipsychotic medications on children. In the United States, the antipsychotics, risperidone and Seroquel, I think are in the top 4 to 6 prescriptions given out in this country, not to mention the antidepressants. Now, how do we understand all this in this very successful society? Well, medicine, mainstream medical perspective in which I was trained, basically looks at it from a very strictly physical point of view. Mainstream medicine separates two areas that can't be separated. One, it separates mind from the body. So we treat the body as a discrete entity without reference to people's emotional and spiritual lives, number one. And number two, we separate the individual from the environment as if the individual was not affected by the environment. Now, I'll give you 3 examples of how that's simply not applicable. It's been studied now and well documented that children whose parents are stressed are more likely to have asthma. So in polluted areas where the air pollution itself acts as an irritant and therefore increases the risk of asthma, which represents an irritability of the airways, it's the children of parents who are most stressed who are most likely to have asthma. In other words, the psychological emotional states of the child, of the parent I should say, affects the physiology of the child's lungs. And how do we treat asthma? Guess what? We treat them with stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. But we never ask ourselves, does stress have something to do with causing these kids asthma?
So, the team at Inside Serene found some research that backs up Dr. Gabor Maté's ideas on how parental stress can trigger asthma in kids. A study from the University of Queensland shows that financial stress in parents makes asthma symptoms worse in children. Dr. Shahunja said it's the first Aussie study to explore how these factors affect asthma in kids aged 1 to 15 over time. They looked at things like mom's depression, financial stress, big life changes, and how available parents are to see their impact on wheezing in kids with asthma. They compared kids who had wheezing with those who didn't. Kids with parents facing moderate to high stress were 77% more likely to have worse wheezing. Those with moms dealing with moderate depression had a 55% higher chance of bad wheezing. and kids with parents facing financial issues had a 40% higher risk. While Dr. Gabor Maté's work offers great insights, this research gives more perspectives for those curious about how parental stress affects childhood asthma.
In Australia, to give you another example of what I mean by the biopsychosocial nature of human beings, which is to say that our biology is shaped and affected, influenced for a lifetime by our psychological and social relationships and environment. In Australia, they looked at 500 women or so with breast biopsies for suspicious lumps. Now, before the results came back, these women underwent a psychological interview. It turned out that if a woman had been emotionally stressed prior to the onset of that lump, that by itself did not increase the chance of that lump being cancerous. Zero effect. Similarly, if a woman was emotionally isolated, that had no effect either. Zero. But if a woman was emotionally isolated and stressed, the risk of that lump being cancerous was 9 times as great as the average. Now, the physicians couldn't figure this one out, because logically speaking, how do 0 and 0 add up to 9? How does 0 and 0 multiply to 9? But if we understand that human beings' physiology is affected by their relationships, then we see that when stress happens, cortisol elevates in the body, which is a stress hormone, which suppresses the immune system. Adrenaline increases in the body, which disorganizes the nervous system. In the short term, they help you fight back or to escape, but in the long term, they actually can suppress the body. No wonder then that people who are isolated and stressed are more likely to develop disease, which is to say that the disease is not simply a manifestation of some physical process unique to them, but it reflects their particular lives in a particular environment, in a particular culture.
Dr. Gabor Maté claims trauma contributes to everything from cancer to ADHD. But what does the evidence say? At Inside Serene, we found some research supporting Dr. Gabor Maté's ideas about how parental stress can trigger a range of health issues in kids. For example, the University of Queensland discovered that financial stress in parents worsens asthma symptoms in children. Consider Emily, a 10-year-old girl. When her parents faced financial troubles, her mom got super stressed, and Emily's asthma got worse. It's a clear example of how parental stress impacts children's health. Another study from the American Psychological Association found that children exposed to high levels of parental stress were more likely to develop various health issues, including asthma, anxiety, and weakened immune systems. They highlighted how chronic stress affects the immune system, making kids more susceptible to respiratory problems and other health issues. Chronic stress leads to higher levels of cortisol and other stress hormones, which can cause inflammation and weaken the immune system. This makes it easier for various health issues like respiratory problems, anxiety, and even digestive disorders to develop and become more severe. We're not here to discredit Dr. Gabor Maté's insights. Instead, we want to give our audience a broader perspective. Dr. Gabor Maté's insights are validated by studies like these, showing the profound impact of stress and trauma on health. To illustrate this further, Dr. Gabor Maté has worked with many high-profile individuals to explore the impact of trauma. One notable example is his encounter with Prince Harry. In their discussion, Prince Harry opened up about the profound impact of his childhood trauma on his mental and physical health. Dr. Gabor Maté's approach helped highlight how unresolved trauma and stress can lead to a range of health issues, from anxiety and depression to physical ailments. By examining real-life examples and supporting research, it becomes clear that parental stress and trauma are well-founded. This broader perspective helps us understand the deep connections between our mental and physical health, reinforcing the importance of addressing stress and trauma in both children and adults.
But I think we need to broaden our view of the environment to actually include also the social, relational, interactive, and cultural aspects as well. Now, and also the economic ones. So, for example, a study a little while ago showed that when women who are pregnant breathe in polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, their children are more likely to have behavior problems by school age. So we think this is simply a physically environmental problem. No, it isn't. It's also a socioeconomic one, since it's poor women who tend to live in more polluted areas. And therefore, the medical scientists who did the study at Mount Sinai University School of Medicine, Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York said, this is really a paper about social justice. Poor people have more exposure to these things on all accounts, whether bad air or psychosocial stress and other things. That's a societal problem, and the changes are not going to be on an individual level. They're going to be on the societal level. You can't separate individuals from their environment. Or to take another example, we know that lead exposure actually disturbs the nervous system, leading to learning and behavior problems. But amongst poorer kids who have an iron-deficient diet, that promotes the absorption of lead. So it's not just a lead problem, it's a socioeconomic problem on account of the poorer diet that these children have. So when I talk about the toxic culture that a materialistic society offers its members, what am I referring to? Well, materialism is really a system of belief or behavior which considers material things, and particularly the control and possession of material things, as more important than human values such as connection, love, or spiritual values such as recognizing the unity of everything. And that's the kind of culture we live in. Interestingly enough, the religious right, in their opposition to the very idea of climate change, or to the idea that the environment is important to look at, they will quote the Old Testament where man is given stewardship over the earth and all other creatures. But when they talk about stewardship, they mean control and dominance. There's another way to look at stewardship, which is caring and nurturing for, looking after. And in the materialistic sense, it's that control and ownership that we look at. And that means that the culture itself, quite apart from the physical toxins that we spew into the environment and the way in which we're altering the very air that we breathe and the very sun that beats down on us, that shines on us, we actually are affected also by the toxicity of human relationships or the lack of human relationships that this kind of a society that emphasizes material values teaches us to pursue.
Dr. Gabor Maté claims that trauma and stress can have profound impacts on our mental and physical health. But how does this relate to the toxic influence of social media in today's society? At Inside Serene, we explored Dr. Gabor Maté's insights and how they apply to the modern world, particularly the pervasive influence of social media. Social media platforms, while connecting us like never before, have also become breeding grounds for stress, anxiety, and even trauma. The story of Sarah, shown at the beginning of the video, is a perfect example. Sarah is a teenager who spends hours each day on social media. The constant comparison to others, exposure to cyberbullying, and pressure to maintain a perfect online image have led to severe anxiety and depression. This clearly shows how social media can negatively impact mental health. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that trauma isn't just about catastrophic events, but can also result from everyday stressors that overwhelm our coping mechanisms. Social media often amplifies these stressors, creating a toxic environment where individuals feel inadequate and constantly judged. Supporting this, a study by the Royal Society for Public Health found that social media use is linked to increased rates of anxiety, depression, and poor sleep. These platforms create unrealistic expectations and foster a culture of comparison, which can lead to chronic stress and mental health issues. Dr. Gabor Maté's insights into the effects of stress and trauma help us understand why social media can be so damaging. He emphasizes that our need for connection and validation can make us vulnerable to the negative aspects of social media, leading to a cycle of stress and anxiety. Moreover, Dr. Gabor Maté's encounter with Prince Harry shed light on how societal pressures and public scrutiny can exacerbate mental health struggles. Prince Harry discussed how the relentless media attention and criticism affected his mental well-being, highlighting the broader implications of living in a digitally connected and scrutinized world. We're not here to demonize social media, Instead, we want to provide a broader perspective based on Dr. Gabor Maté's insights. Understanding the toxic influence of social media through the lens of trauma and stress can help us create healthier online environments. By fostering genuine connections and promoting self-compassion, we can mitigate the harmful effects of social media and support better mental health for everyone. Let's just be aware of the effects of social media on our kids and be mindful as parents by showing love, affection, and a sense of belonging so they won't look for validation from the facade of social media. Let us help together to build a community that fosters a safe space for our kids.
And from that perspective, we have to understand that medicine is not simply a science. It's much more than that. It's also an ideology. It's a way of looking at human beings. So when we look at human beings as individuals without understanding the importance of their social relationships and their emotional, psychological interactions with others, that's actually a manifestation of the individualistic perspective of the entrepreneur who says that only I matter and what I gain or what I control matters, and we're all in competition with one another. So you see that economic ideological perspective also showing up in its own particular way in the practice of medicine. Well, reality is totally different. Reality tells us that we can't be separated. And this begins already in pregnancy. So a study out of Johns Hopkins University in 2004, for example, showed that the reactivity to stress of the fetus is affected by the stress, depression, or anxiety of the mother. So when you look at the heartbeat and the movement of infants in the womb, whose mothers are stressed, depressed, or anxious, you see different patterns of activity, and that will have lifetime effects. The studies reflect, this paper says, growing evidence that stress and depression can have early and lasting effects on the child's life, including increased behavior problems.
Dr. Gabor Maté believes that the connection between a mother and her unborn child is profound, impacting the child's mental and emotional development. But what does the evidence say? Here at Inside Serene, we dug into Dr. Gabor Maté's insights on how a mother's stress can affect her baby, even before birth. According to Dr. Gabor Maté, the emotional and physical state of a pregnant mother directly influences the developing fetus. When a mother is stressed, her body releases stress hormones like cortisol into her bloodstream. These hormones can cross the placenta and affect the unborn child. This prenatal exposure to stress can have lasting effects on the child's development, leading to increased risks of mental and physical health issues later in life. Let's talk about Anna, a pregnant woman dealing with a lot of stress from work and financial worries. Dr. Gabor Maté's insights suggest that Anna's stress could impact her baby, potentially increasing the risk of the child developing anxiety or other health problems as they grow. Now, consider a more extreme example. What if the mother is struggling with alcoholism? Dr. Gabor Maté explains that the effects can be even more severe. Alcohol consumption during pregnancy can disrupt the fetus's brain development, leading to fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, FASD. Children with FASD often face lifelong challenges, including cognitive impairments, behavioral problems, and mental health issues like anxiety and depression. Backing up Dr. Gabor Maté's views, a study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology found that higher cortisol levels in pregnant women were linked to higher anxiety levels in their children at age 10. The research showed that stress hormones from the mother can directly affect the baby's brain development, changing how the child handles stress later on. Another study by the National Institutes of Health found that maternal stress can weaken the immune system of the unborn child, making them more prone to infections and chronic illnesses. This really shows how a mom's emotional well-being can have long-term effects on her child's health. We're not just repeating what Dr. Gabor Maté says. We're giving you solid information to support that his findings are correct and valid. Dr. Gabor Maté stresses that understanding this connection can lead to better health outcomes. By reducing stress and creating a supportive environment for pregnant women, we can positively influence the long-term health of their children. We're not here to scare anyone, but to raise awareness. By recognizing the impact of maternal stress and substance abuse, we can take steps to support expecting mothers. Showing love, providing emotional support, and creating a stress-free environment can make a huge difference. Let's come together to build a community that supports mothers-to-be, ensuring the healthiest start for the next generation. By being mindful of stress and promoting a nurturing environment, we can help expecting mothers and their unborn children thrive. Dr. Gabor Maté's insights remind us of the deep connection between a mother and her child, and the importance of caring for both their mental and physical well-being.
The impact of toxic stress on children. And these children who experience toxic stress because the environment was stressed, because their parents were highly stressed, or dysfunctional, or abusive, later on in life, they have a significantly increased risk of heart disease, obesity, diabetes mellitus, high blood pressure, and a whole list of other medical conditions. Not only that, how does an infant and a young child adjust to stress? Well, by certain coping mechanisms. If you're very stressed, but you're helpless in the face of the stress, and you can't escape it or to change it, one of the ways you'll respond is by tuning it out, by dissociating, by throwing your mind somewhere else so you don't have to suffer the discomfort and distress of the pressures that the environment is placing upon you. But if you're doing that when you're 1 or 2 years old and your brain is developing, then tuning out becomes wired into your brain. And guess what? 8 years later, they're going to diagnose you with ADHD and give you medications. And if you're looking at the preponderance of all these childhood conditions that are just burgeoning in our society, autism, Asperger's, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, a whole range of childhood disorders, what are we seeing? Not genetic problems, not individual problems, but the effects of a highly stressed environment on parents, which are then passed on to their children despite the parents' love and despite the parents' best efforts. Other studies have shown similarly that early childhood adversity significantly increases the risk of addiction, obesity, autoimmune disease, mental health disorders, and so on. A simple fact such as parental divorce has been shown to increase the risk of strokes by a factor of 2. It doubles them 50, 60, 70 years later. So I'm thinking we're talking about divorces which have a lot of rancor and stress associated with them. So what happens early has a huge impact later on down the line. The good news, however, is that similarly, if you understand the biopsychosocial perspective here, we look at a study about stroke victims in their 60s and 70s. If they're surrounded by a loving, supportive community, their chances of recovery are far greater than those who suffer a stroke and are emotionally isolated, which again points to the importance of community and the importance of the environment from the psychological, social, and cultural perspective. Well, where does that leave us? It leaves us, first of all, looking at the economic issues. And what we know is that growing up in a low socioeconomic background can actually impair the working memory and the size of different parts of the brain of the adult. So poverty in this country is far from simply an economic question. It's also a question of human development and what kind of consequences that'll have on people's behavior, capacity to respond to stress, and therefore to get ahead in a society in which getting ahead is the highest value. And if you don't get ahead, you're left behind. Similarly, children who are stressed early will have problems with impulse regulation later on. Impulse regulation means that their capacity to anticipate consequences and to respond calmly to the environment is impaired. And that means they're also going to be at a greater risk of addiction. Now, if you look at it,
Dr. Gabor Maté has some pretty eye-opening insights on how stress, addiction, and trauma in mothers can affect their kids even before they're born. He believes these early influences are a major factor in why some youth end up in trouble later on. So let's dive into how this all works. Dr. Gabor Maté suggests that when a mom is really stressed out, dealing with addiction, or has gone through trauma herself, it can seriously impact her unborn baby. When a mom is stressed, her body releases hormones like cortisol. These hormones can cross the placenta and mess with the baby's developing brain, especially the parts that help with handling emotions and stress. Take a mom who's dealing with a lot of stress at work or has financial troubles. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that this stress can make it more likely for her child to have issues with anxiety and controlling impulses as they grow up. This can lead to risky behaviors and even substance abuse as they try to cope with their feelings. Research backs this up. Studies from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, show that stress during pregnancy can weaken the baby's immune system, making them more prone to infections and illnesses. This added health stress can make it even harder for these kids to deal with emotional and behavioral problems, sometimes leading to criminal activities as a form of escape. Another example is moms who struggle with alcohol during pregnancy. Dr. Gabor Maté talks about how this can lead to fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, FASD, which cause lifelong challenges like learning difficulties, behavioral problems, and mental health issues. These kids are more likely to have trouble in school and in social settings, which can set them on a path toward trouble. So what's the takeaway? Dr. Gabor Maté emphasizes the importance of supporting expecting mothers to reduce stress and provide a nurturing environment. By doing this, we can help prevent these early stressors from impacting their kids' futures. This means creating a community that supports pregnant women, offers help with addiction, and reduces stressors wherever possible. We're not just repeating what Dr. Gabor Maté says. We're giving you solid information to show his findings are spot on. The better we understand these connections, the better we can support both mothers and their kids, potentially steering them away from future problems. For more on Dr. Gabor Maté's work and the supporting research, check out studies from the NIH and journals like Psychoneuroendocrinology. These resources provide a ton of evidence backing up these claims and show the profound impact of maternal experiences on children's development.
We're actually looking at two factors. We're looking at, number one, the desperation to escape from the pain and distress that the child has experienced early on in life, which then become programmed into his personality and his heart and his brain. And how do you escape? Well, one way to escape is through addictive behaviors, whether that be drugs or the internet or sex or food or shopping or whatever else. And number two, since, as I've already mentioned, brain development early in life is affected by the environment, people who are traumatized early in life, especially those that are traumatized, their brain development is impaired. And that their brain circuits and neurotransmitters, the chemicals in the brain, are actually at a disadvantage. So when they do the drugs, they feel complete and whole and feel good for the first time in their lives. Their addiction is not a matter of choice. It's a matter of a coping mechanism that is a response to early stress. Now, if you look at what stress is, it's not just a psychological event. I've already alluded to it. It's a physical event. It sets off a cascade of hormones, particularly cortisol and adrenaline in your body, which in the short term, again, help you escape or to fight back, but in the long term, damage your heart, your nervous system, your intestines, and suppress your immune system, which then makes you more prone for all kinds of diseases, naturally. So when it comes to understanding something like cancer, we can't just understand it in terms of the individual. And as somebody very astutely said a couple of years ago in a series on cancer that the New York Times published, that trying to understand cancer by studying the individual human cell is like trying to understand a traffic jam by looking inside the internal combustion engine. You really have to look at the whole picture, and that whole picture involves the lifelong environment in which we live. And from that same perspective again, when we look at something like the obesity epidemic, which has 30% of kids in the United States overweight now, significantly overweight, It's not a food problem. Well, it is a food problem, the junk foods and all that. But it's mostly a stress problem. Because what people do is they soothe their stresses, like any addiction, they soothe their stresses with their addictive behaviors. And those junk foods work in the short term because they release feel-good hormones in the brain. So if you want to look at children and prevent obesity, it's not enough to tell them not to eat junk foods or to get more exercise. You have to say what's lacking in their lives. That in their lives, of course, are human relationships that are nurturing and supportive. Again, not because the parents are not trying to do their best, but because the parents are trying to do their best under impossible circumstances. If you look at what actually triggers stress, the significant factors that trigger stress are uncertainty, lack of information, and loss of control. If you look at rats and you hook two pairs of rats together, or two rats together, yoke them together, and you attach an electrode to their tails and you shock them with electricity, they will have physiological stress. But if one rat has a paw open that can shut off the lever that delivers that stress, that electrical shock, even though both rats get the same electrical jolt for the same period of time, the rat with the paw free will have less stress hormones in their body because they have some control. Now, what happens in a culture where the economy is going on a tube, where decisions are made far away by people who don't even know you and you don't know who they are, and your life is very much affected by these large forces over which you have increasingly a sense that you have no control or even influence over? Well, that means
Dr. Gabor Maté's insights into how stress and trauma impact children extend to understanding the roots of childhood obesity. According to Dr. Gabor Maté, the emotional and psychological state of parents, especially mothers, significantly influences the health outcomes of their children, including the risk of obesity. How parental stress contributes to childhood obesity, emotional regulation, and coping mechanisms. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that children often adopt unhealthy coping mechanisms such as overeating to deal with stress and emotional discomfort. When parents are stressed, children can pick up on these emotions and may use food as a way to soothe themselves. Overeating can become a habitual response to stress, leading to excessive calorie intake and weight gain, stress hormones, and metabolism. Chronic stress in parents can lead to an increased release of stress hormones like cortisol. Research has shown that elevated cortisol levels can affect metabolism and fat storage in children, increasing the risk of obesity. Parental stress can also disrupt regular meal patterns and sleep, both of which are critical factors in maintaining a healthy weight. Parental modeling and food environment. Children learn behaviors by observing their parents. If parents cope with stress by eating unhealthy foods or have poor eating habits, children are likely to mimic these behaviors. Stress can also affect the types of food that parents provide. Stressed parents might opt for convenience foods, which are often high in fat, sugar, and calories, contributing to weight gain in children. Emotional and physical neglect. Dr. Gabor Maté discusses how stressed or traumatized parents may inadvertently neglect their children's emotional and physical needs. This neglect can lead to children feeling insecure and using food as a source of comfort. Emotional neglect can also impair a child's ability to self-regulate their emotions and hunger, leading to overeating. Supporting research. A study published in the journal Pediatrics found that children of mothers who reported high levels of stress were more likely to become obese. The research suggests that maternal stress affects children's eating patterns and stress responses, increasing their risk of obesity. The American Journal of Epidemiology reported that children exposed to high levels of family stress had a higher risk of obesity. The study highlighted how stress affects eating behaviors and physical activity levels, contributing to weight gain. Dr. Gabor Maté's insights into the interplay between parental stress and childhood obesity emphasize the importance of addressing the emotional and psychological health of parents to improve the health outcomes of their children. By reducing stress and fostering a supportive and healthy environment, parents parents can help prevent obesity in their children and promote overall well-being. Understanding these connections can guide interventions and support programs aimed at reducing childhood obesity by targeting the underlying stressors in family environments. For further information and resources, consider exploring studies published in journals like Pediatrics and the American Journal of Epidemiology, as well as works by Dr. Gabor Maté.
We're going to be stressed. And that stress then will lead to addictive behaviors. That stress then will lead to parents passing that stress on to their children. In the 19th century, Karl Marx talked about alienation, which is a separation, being a stranger to something. And you're an alien to something. And Marx said there were four alienations in this culture. One is we're alienated from nature. Well, at a conference dedicated to looking at the physical and the natural environment, I don't have to say much to you to show how alienated we are from nature when we're destroying nature itself. The second alienation is from other people. And that means we have less contact, we have less intimacy, we have less trust. We have less of a sense of relationship. And that, of course, as I've shown you, leads to increased propensity to illness, physical and mental. Work that's not creative, that doesn't reflect who we are, that imposes depression, anxiety, a sense of meaninglessness. And when we have a sense of meaninglessness, we'll want to substitute that sense of meaninglessness or that sense of meaning that we've lost by all kinds of other activities, and then we get all hung up on how we look, or how people feel about us, what we can obtain, what we can possess, what successes we can achieve. In other words, all the false substitutes which cannot possibly compensate us for the lack of genuine meaning. And of course, what this society does, it sells us a lot of products that substitute for that loss of meaning. In fact, much of the economy is based on a loss of meaning in our culture. And finally, and most importantly, we become alienated. Finally, and most importantly, we become alienated from ourselves. Well, let me ask you a question here, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you had the following experience? That you had a powerful gut feeling about something, you didn't pay attention to it, and you were sorry afterwards. Please put your hand up if you have. Say, now, you know what you're telling me? You're telling me that at some point in your childhood, you got separated from yourself. Because no infant is born without gut feelings. Infants are totally connected to their gut feelings. Have you ever met a 2-day-old who didn't know how to express their gut feelings?
Dr. Gabor Maté has some powerful insights on how trauma and maternal stress can affect youth offenders, and recent statistics on youth offending in the U.S. provide context to these views. Current statistics on youth offenders in the U.S. Between 2000 and 2020, the number of youth held in juvenile justice facilities dropped from 108,800 to 25,000, marking a significant 77% decline. This decline reflects both a decrease in youth offending and changes in how youth offenders are managed, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which prompted a reduction in incarcerations to prevent virus spread in facilities. In 2019, the youth arrest rate was 68% lower than in 2000, indicating a significant drop in youth-related crimes over the past 2 decades. Racial disparities remain a significant issue. Black youth are 4.4 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth, with similar disparities seen among tribal and Latinx youth. Impact of maternal stress and addiction. Dr. Gabor Maté explains that trauma and stress experienced by mothers can have profound effects on their children even before birth. For example, maternal stress releases hormones like cortisol, which can cross the placenta and impact fetal brain development. This early exposure can lead to difficulties with emotional regulation and impulse control, increasing the likelihood of behavioral issues and substance abuse as the child grows. Supporting Dr. Gabor Maté's insights, research shows that maternal stress can weaken the immune system of the unborn child, making them more susceptible to infections and chronic illnesses. This biological vulnerability can exacerbate emotional and behavioral challenges, further raising the risk of criminal behavior as a coping mechanism. By understanding the deep connection between maternal experiences and child development, we can develop better prevention and intervention strategies for youth offenders. This approach not only validates Dr. Gabor Maté's findings, but also offers a pathway to healthier outcomes for future generations. For more detailed statistics and insights, you can explore the reports from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention and the Sentencing Project, which provide comprehensive data on youth offending and the juvenile justice system.
Something very powerful happens to alienate you from your true self because the world couldn't stand who you really were, and your parents were too stressed themselves to honor and recognize who you really were. Just as a parent, I did that to my kids without meaning to. And then we become alienated from ourselves, we shut down our gut feelings, and our gut feelings are not luxuries, you know. They tell us what is right and what is wrong. They tell us what is dangerous and what is friendly. They tell us what is safe and what is dangerous. And they tell us what is true and what is false. So when we're alienated from our gut feelings, we no longer have a sense of reality, no longer have a sense of truth. Well, the good news is that human beings can regain their sense of connection to themselves, just as we can regain our sense of connection to our nature. I will make just one final point here about the economics of it. A Harvard study 3 years ago showed that the lack of medical insurance in this country leads to 45,000 deaths annually. This is not an ideological question about healthcare. And most recently, President Bush said, well, there's no problem. Everybody can show up in the emergency ward. Sure you can. Once you've had a stroke because you didn't get treated for your high blood pressure, which you got because you were so stressed, you can go to the emergency ward and you get treated for your stroke. But the lack of health care that's available to people, which is very much a social economic question, it itself is a significant factor. Well, the good news is that we can regain a connection to ourselves. Stress hormone levels are higher. That's our nature as human beings. So contrary to the myth in our culture that we're separated individual, aggressive, competitive creatures, we're actually wired for empathy, wired for connection, wired for love, wired for compassion. So really, to move forward, all we have to do.
As we navigate the complexities of parenting, it's essential to remember that our emotional well-being profoundly impacts our children's health. Dr. Gabor Maté wisely said, "The more stressed we are, the more disconnected we are from ourselves, the more we pass our stress and disconnection onto our children." By fostering a supportive, loving environment and addressing our stress, we can create a foundation for our children to thrive. Let's work together to build a healthier future for the next generation. Remember, every step we take towards reducing stress and promoting well-being is a step towards a brighter, healthier future for our children.